phone call happened the night of the 2016 election, when people on my side of the divide were quite shocked and shook. And I ended up calling my mother, telling her that I really felt like democracy had broken because of who had won, and what I saw in that person. And then she came at me with that line that, wait a minute, I voted and who I wanted to win won. So democracy is not broken, democracy worked. And she had thought that that wasn't going to happen. All the signals around her seemed to say, no, don't even bother voting and all of that. I think where that moment speaks beyond that moment really is with what democracy even is. Democracy is not supposed to be clean and tidy. It's not supposed to be pleasant, even, And the longer I do this work, the more convinced I am of that. When we are truly bringing our honest perspectives together, that's annoying most of the time. It's actually not fun. We have to contend with the disagreements that not just that irritate us most, like it's all about, feelings. It's also the disagreements, the opinions that we think are going to be bad if we listen to them too much. Democracy thrives in America because of the way we honor diversity. We honor diversity to our very core, in some beautiful ways. And my friend Ibu Patel, who works with Interfaith America, put this so well. And there was another I never thought of it that way moment I had when I heard him say the following. But he basically said, diversity is not just the differences you like. And that just, I needed to hear that. We're not going to agree. When the very first episode of the A Braver Way podcast that I host this season was with a presidential historian, and we talked about Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. And those two guys hated each other, absolutely couldn't stand each other, and they undermined each other, and they just were jerks. And it turns out that the things that their friction ended up kind of populating arguments for years to come. The city versus the country, states versus federal, industry versus agrarian. It turns out that they got so preoccupied with each other and so annoyed and so sure that the other man's policies were going to send this country straight to the trash can at such a volatile infancy time, right? They probably thought their friction was just making things worse in some ways, but no, their friction made us smarter. It really did. And I think it's easy to forget that we are still building this democracy, that this country was not something that was sort of built by a bunch of folks a long time ago and just like, okay, we're going to shake our hands of this, and now it's just maintenance. No, that's not what this is. And my mom and I were born in another country that doesn't do it as well as here. And I think it was a good reminder from my mom, She spent most of her life in a country where democracy didn't work the same way. And we really gotta hold on to what we have here and remember what's precious and what's worth preserving. And maybe grab some courage to take into our next disagreement.
So you walk through so many, I think, wonderful approaches. I think, the book names some of the big challenges that, as you begin, it's the siloing, it's the othering, it's the sorting from, individuals and groups to seeing these tensions to then really inviting us more into this sort of conversational approach to looking at the issues that are in front of us. What within this book, in the process of writing it, so maybe less of a retrospective thing now, but really as much as you can think about it, what was the most surprising thing for you that you ended up including here that has become part of your argument and thinking about how to have these courageous conversations that you kind of originally would not have thought about as being maybe the approach or the best way to think about kind of engaging across those differences that you write about so eloquently here? What was surprising to you as you did your research and writing and conversations with so many of the people who show up in this book?
Yeah, well, there's a moment in the video of my TEDx talk where I give a line that I first wrote in the book that I thought was, probably pretty cogent and whatnot, but I'm interrupted by applause. And you can see me go, huh? Wait, what? And that line has become something that I keep seeing sort of deeply resonate. And so I've spent more time since the book was published leaning into what's contained therein. And the line is that whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. The the sort of inherent self-evident truth of that, when you consider the world that we're in, it's a world where the default settings of our information landscape would put us into those silos, are already sorting us, where blue zip codes are getting bluer and red zip codes are getting redder. And it's a fairly obvious truth that we don't spend a lot of time looking at. We don't look at it as it pertains to what we must do. But I think it becomes almost the best kick in the pants. Do you know what I mean? Like, whoever's underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination, and your imagination is not a great source of truth. If you value truth, that means that you need to ask yourself, who am I talking about but never with? Because those people are the ones that exist in my mind, most likely as projections rather than reality. I'm not checking the signals I'm getting from that polarized world with the reality of people. And that, I think, is just becoming more and more of an issue, more and more of a something to address. So it's a mindset that's a bit of a kick in the pants around, if we want to live lives that seek truth, and if we want to be lenses on the world that are capable of seeing reality past the misperceptions and exaggerations that exist, then we're going to have to ask ourselves these questions, and we're going to have to try to seek out the friction.
So how do you do that? I mean, so in one sense, the book walks through so many sets of some practices and kind of approaches to this. In your own experience, I mean, the podcast is a good example. You are engaging in conversation regularly with people with kind of diverse views, but even in your own life, and you're not just in kind of your family setting or space, but how are you navigating this? There's a question that you write about in the fourth chapter about opinions, and you're referencing this man by the name of David, who's unpacking these conversations, and he poses this question, and I think it's such a powerful one. I use it in my own class. What do you value more, the truth or your own beliefs? How do you navigate this, or how would you suggest, or maybe recommend, we think about those sorts of things? Because the book offers lots of ways to engage that, but what's the short version of that, if I might ask that? How do you do this?
Well, the good news is you don't have to be in a purple area. I often get people telling me basically that. I live in a really, really, really blue city, in a really, really, really blue state, or in a very, very, very red town, and it's all kind of the same. But part of what's happened with our divides is not just a blindness and a lack of clear, accurate perception from one side to the other, but also within the sides. I don't know if any of you have had this experience of being, in a small group of friends and whatnot, and some issue comes up. Let's say it's abortion or immigration, or who knows, guns. And because maybe it's already understood that you all probably voted the same way in the last presidential election, somebody speaks about that issue as if everyone agrees with however they put that issue. And this has happened to me several times with the issue of abortion. And I feel instantly unseen because my views on abortion are quite complicated. I fall on one side, but there's an asterisk. And then there's that moment of truth, like, what do I say? What do I do? Can I look for a way in? So that's just to say that there are infinite fractals of diverse opinions all around. We are not automatons. We don't all think the same. So you can cross that bridge and you can find friction almost anywhere. One of the easiest ways to do it is just when you already have a sense that someone you know thinks differently from you on one issue, is just to bring that issue up, bring that conversation to play, and speak that way. Another is just to speak up when the contrast arises. When you get that little, thing in your heart where you go, oh, I think I might disagree with this person. But normally you would let it slide. Whatever it is they just said, maybe they used a word that signaled to you that they may not think the way you do because you wouldn't use that word. You would use a different word. Maybe they said illegal immigrant and you prefer undocumented immigrant for reasons, or vice versa. When you see that signal, there's a contrast. Can you engage that contrast? Can you find a way to say, hey, by the way, earlier, I noticed you used the term illegal immigrant. And it just made me wonder what you make of such a complicated issue. And I wonder if we have some contrast there. And I don't know, just bring it up, see what happens. So it's leaning into the contrasts. It's noticing when they come up in daily life. And it's a little bit having the guts to ask the question. And it's not as hard as people think also, because you don't have to just go into some long slog that's an hour long or whatever. It can be like a momentary, oh yeah, no, I'm generally, this way on immigration. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, maybe we can talk about it later. Yeah, cool. That's it. So just being open to the contrast, inviting them in and leaving it so that you could pick it up later.
So speaking of questions, I've asked a few, but we have some questions that some students have put together from the first year experience that I have the opportunity to ask on their behalf, just for simplicity and process. So I'm going to ask some questions here, and I'll mention some names and majors and where they're from to give some context here. But these are some wonderful questions, so we'll see how many we can go through. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, very good. So this one, the first one's going to come from Isla Sambulan, who is a chemistry major from actually not too far, right here in Elkton, Maryland. She asks, your book presents great strategies for having conversations with people who share different views. But since conversations are a two-way street, how do you handle people who are not willing to keep an open mind or learn more?
That's a great question. Part of the good news is we can never be very certain about that last piece. They're not willing to learn more right now. They appear to not be willing to learn more. Might be a little more accurate and leave a little space, right? But beyond that, there's a couple things that I think really help to keep in mind. One is that there's a lot of research, more and more coming out, around how curiosity is contagious. Meaning, there's two people in a conversation, only one of them is practicing curiosity, asking questions, speaking in a way that leaves opinions sounding movable, flexible. As I think about this issue now, here's where I fall, rather than this is right and this is wrong, which is more absolutist type of communication. And what the research has found is that when one person in a conversation uses that more flexible language, when one person in a conversation gives a little room for the other one to step in, what do you think? It is more likely that the other person will pick up on that language in their own. It is not guaranteed at all. And in fact, it may not happen for a while, but it is possible. So that's one thing, is you never know. Now, the principle that I think really guides, well, how long will it take before this person gets curious about me? Or, decides to kind of detach from something they believe well enough to be able to look at it and examine it. And the principle to keep in mind is that people can only hear when they're heard. Across a divide, when there is suspicion, people can only hear when they feel heard. And so the key that unlocks this box is the one that sometimes we're most reluctant to give because we believe it should be reciprocal. It's listening. It's listening, and it's more listening. Now, we don't have infinite amounts of patience. So that's a very practical issue, right? if it took 1,000 hours of listening to this person for them to, we don't have that time, right? You know, so everyone has to kind of figure out what that is. But the other thing is to remember that, unfortunately, as a result of what our, you know, toxic divides have wrought, a lot of people, and I've certainly heard about many, I've met some, instead of me looking at you, I'm talking to you, you know, I'm conservative, you're liberal. What I see in you, the one individual liberal, is a stand-in for all the horrors that I believe liberals represent. And I'm not going to let down my guard until you answer for all the horrible things that I believe liberals have done. That's really hard. That's really hard. Like, you know, to be able to see the individual apart from all the stories that we have collected about the other side can be really hard for people. And in that situation, people can only hear when they're heard. Well, gosh, they'll never feel heard because they're waiting for all the apologies that will never come. So it's so much about psychology, and it's so dependent. And I believe that there's a courage in patience, meaning it may take more time than you think. So it's up to you whether or not to continue or to stop. But will you give up on them? Maybe you don't have to give up.
Well, so actually the next question actually, I think builds nicely with that. This is from Benjamin Denlasky, a criminal justice major from Mahwah, New Jersey. And he asks, how does a person maintain open-mindedness and curiosity when dealing with people who hold views that are deeply offensive or harmful? Are there limits to engaging in conversations with such individuals? And if so, when do you draw that line? I mean, you've already started to go into this, but like, where's that gray area?
Yeah. I think it would be really nice if there were universal prescriptions for all these things, and there aren't. Everything is dependent on who you are, what issue you're talking about, your relationship and or attachment to a particular aspect of that issue, you know, how much or which of these things are kind of in an identity level, what relationship you have with this other person, what history you have with them, if you have evidence that, you know, this or that. Anyway, so it just goes on and on and on. So the key question there is, where do you draw that line? Where do you draw that line? There's a very kind of abstract, but I think useful guide to that, which is, you know, heat in a conversation is good. The question is whether you are cooking something or burning something. Are you cooking up understanding? Are you cooking up a connection? Are you cooking up the ability to have candor with each other, really explore together something that's really difficult? Or are you burning something? Are you burning your sense of dignity? Are you burning your sense of safety, right? Because that's one of the first red lines, is trying to have a conversation when you are really scared. A curious conversation is just impossible. It becomes very, very hard. So when you're a certain level of afraid or thinking like harm is coming, harm is already here, harm is coming to me, harm is coming to others, then if you want to revisit that conversation with that person, you probably need to have some conversations with yourself first to see and determine if you're able to come in with curiosity, or if it's even advisable for you to do that. So I think that's really important. It reminds me of my friend Baratunde Thurston. I interviewed him for the A Braver Way podcast. He's extraordinary. He's the host of a podcast called How to Citizen, former writer at The Onion and The Daily Show, like amazing guy. And we were talking about this amazing bridge builder named Daryl Davis, who's kind of a legend in our space. Daryl Davis is a Black blues musician. Sounds like you might know about him.
I do, yeah.
Who has spoken to, sat down with, and he's Black. He's a Black blues musician. Sat down and spoken with card-carrying members of the Ku Klux Klan. And fast forward through those conversations, he has a collection of 200 Ku Klux Klan robes that people have given him on their way out of the Klan, because through conversations with him, they have realized that their hate is absurd, that it doesn't even make sense. Now, but to imagine, like, Daryl's story to me is about what's possible, but not what's practical. But it is about what's possible. The impact of Daryl, 200 fewer members of the Ku Klux Klan, that's pretty good. That's pretty good impact. Baratunde and I were talking about this, and he said, He said, "That's Daryl Davis. My name is Baratunde Thurston. And a conversation with a member of the Ku Klux Klan is going to do more for me. No, is going to do more to me than for me," is the way he put it. So that was his way of testing it. That conversation is going to do more to me than for me. And I thought, wow, what a beautifully succinct way to sum up that line, right? What that line might be. So I guess I would summarize by saying, if you're telling yourself that it would be useless, it may not be, because as my friend Manu Meal likes to say, if you don't want to have, a conversation with someone who thinks a group of people shouldn't exist, for example, then who will? Who's going to talk to that person? And what will be the result of that, right? So keep that in mind. Like, we can always have impact. Our stories are powerful and important, and it's important to see each other past these ideas. There's a lot of harm created when we can't talk across these differences. At the same time, you do have to know yourself, and you have to know your own lines, and that's going to take sitting with where your curiosity kind of meets its own boundaries.
So Kaylee Nelson from Staten Island, she's a university studies major, asks, I think a nicely related question here. Do you believe that sometimes anger is an essential emotion that acts as a catalyst for social and political change? How does it, what we were just talking about, it might be a nice segue into that. Where does anger come into play?
Yes. I think it does sometimes act as a catalyst for political and social change. Anger is an emotion that is trying to protect something that feels under threat. Anger is a reaction type of emotion, and so it often just lights up before you even can control it, which can be very bad, but it can also be very good, especially if there's something that is not being acknowledged and it needs to push through somehow, right? Then anger is probably the way that's going to happen. As I talk about in the book, I watch a lot of movies, which I know seems like, wait, where's she going with this? I watch a lot of movies, and I think movies tell us a lot about ourselves. But I'm thinking of all the scenes in all the movies where a certain truth was not faced until somebody yelled it. You know what I mean? Like, what's that classic movie, Network? I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take it anymore. So now you see my dating myself as a film student. I really like old movies. But it is absolutely important. It is really, really important. I think one of the things to watch for with anger, of course, is anger makes us think that if we just yell at the other person, we've made a difference in the thing that we're angry about or the thing we want to change. And that's just not true. It often does the opposite of what we intend to do. So we have to watch that force carefully and keep in mind that if people can't hear us, what's underneath the anger, what the anger is trying to protect, what the anger is trying to say, if the anger is a storm that makes it deafening and people can't hear us, then nothing's going to change other than inspiring fear in others or convincing others not to talk to us about that again. So it depends. Like, if our goal is to be angry, then okay. But if our goal is to make a difference, then we're going to have to learn how to listen to our anger, but not let it take over.
So when we think about the ways in which we come to know what's going on around us and have insights to issues, information, news, social media come into play. So there's a couple questions that are kind of related to these two issues. Evan Croy, an environmental science major from Collegeville, Pennsylvania, asks, how do you recommend we limit polarization in the news that we consume when there seems to be bias everywhere?
Yes.
So I'll start there, and then there's a social media question. So maybe keep this more in that kind of news space for a moment.
Okay.
Information.
So on the news, it's really good to put on a certain filter when we're looking at articles out there. So one is, you've read a headline and now you've clicked on it and now you're reading the story. And if after the first couple graphs, you're like, this story is not really delivering what the headline seemed to imply it was delivering, then that's a good signal that you might have just got. And this comes from Isaac Saul, who is the creator of a newsletter called Tangle that is very, very well known for having achieved what seems impossible, which is being trusted by folks on the left and the right in its format. It's really, really cool. Another thing is when you see articles that are analysis and highlights from an event, a speech, a debate, a thing that was captured on video that you could go see yourself that is now really controversial, don't read the analysis until you have gone and seen the footage, the primary source yourself, if at all possible. Because news is not just about information, it's about opinion formation. So how we consume the news very much influences how we're going to form our opinions. And you can take some agency over how you want to form your opinions. And if you want the most independence on how you form your opinions, make it a point of seeing the event, the primary source first, then go. Now, if you have a preferred side, and this one's challenging, I know, but if you have a preferred side, like I love the New York Times, I go to the New York Times first. But my rule is if I go and scan the headlines of the New York Times, especially if one of those headlines, kind of stuns me about something, then I'm going to go to maybe Real Clear Politics, or I'm going to go to the Dispatch on the right, or maybe the Wall Street Journal. But I'm going to go somewhere where I see, okay, now how's the other half seeing it? And that helps me catch any differences that might turn out to be in the category of misperceptions or exaggerations. So those are just 3 things you can do. Maybe the very last thing I would recommend is that, especially as the election comes closer and closer, media's whole job is to try to get your attention, right? So there's a bottomless amount of media that you can consume. Watch how it makes you feel. What I've noticed about myself is that a lot of times I'm still looking for commentary on that one outrageous thing, not because I want to be more informed as a good citizen, but because I want to see the other side attacked, because I want to feed that beast inside of me. And when I'm conscious enough to recognize that that's what's going on, I need to stop, right? Because at that point, I'm almost like making the misperception stronger. And how is that going to serve me, and how is that going to serve my citizenship?
So we get information, right? And we were talking about kind of news sites and looking at, whether we want to say balanced or not, but at least acknowledging that, some outlets have kind of leanings one way or another, these sorts of things. That's not the only place where people get information online. Annabelle Howard asks, she's a cognitive science major from Lewis, Delaware. Nice. And particularly for young people, as young college students, most of us consume a lot of political content on social media. How do you recommend we process it all? There's so many sources. How do we navigate? I mean, because everything you've just said takes time, even going to the primary sources and looking at, competing interpretations and analysis. How do we process all of this?
That's a great question, worded very well, because I do think that the key is time. The reason that social media consumption of information is so jamming of our natural ability to make sense of things is because it's coming at us so quickly. These platforms are designed to give you one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And the only part of your brain that has time to react is your unconscious, it seems, your reactive mind. You are not giving yourself that time, and the platforms don't want you to. They want you to keep going and going and going. So I think that actually the best way to process it all is to give yourself some time. So in particular, try to practice noticing again how it makes you feel, right? You're on TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever, and you see a video and it's very charismatic, or you're on Facebook or whatever, and you see, I'll give you a great example. There was a meme that I saw once where I was on Facebook, and the meme said, it was about guns, and it said, "I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment." And my reactive mind said, "Yeah, me too. I'm so awesome. I don't want second graders to die. Yeah, those jerks on the other side want second graders to die. Wow, that's terrible." And then I'm about to move on, right? And then I go, whoa, wait a second, what just happened to my brain? Because let's take a look at what's happening in that meme. It was like a nice, square, beautiful, symmetrical, beautifully designed thing with poetic symmetry in its rhetoric. I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment. Like there's science about how the psychology of rhetoric works, right? The symmetry makes us think there's truth there. There's a beautiful truth, the cleverness, the charisma. right? These are the sorts of things that play tricks on us and stop us from taking a step back from that meme. It's like, hang on. The debate about guns is not people who want second graders to die versus people who don't. That's not the debate. Like, hang on. What sort of stereotype about the other side is this meme pushing me to believe because I'm not thinking? So I think it's that. I think it's notice how you feel. And when you have a reaction, stop. Stop and question. What's going on here? Where's that reaction coming from? What am I learning about myself as a result of that reaction to this video, this statement, this assertion I just heard? It can be extraordinarily self-revealing to sit through social media and do it that way. But again, that takes time, and that means they make less money. So you have to take the time yourself.
So there's a part of this that is based off of individual choice, right? I'm going to make a choice to consume news information in certain ways, or be cognizant of social media and the platforms, and fundamentally they're interested in engagement, right? Regardless of whether you agree or disagree, right? It's eyeballs on screens, these sorts of things. Those are all individual choices within systems. There's also, the next question actually kind of gets at the systems framework, particularly around education. Jamie Bannister from Downingtown, Pennsylvania, international relations major, asks, how can the American education system help with reducing polarization? And so I'm going to assume this is a kind of a K-12 question, but maybe we could also think about, if it makes sense to bring it into conversation, the role of colleges and universities, like the University of Delaware, for example. What role does education have in having us understand and address, and ideally, as Jamie asked, reduce polarization?
Well, I think classrooms are extraordinarily great places to practice democracy, the messy pieces of it all. In colleges, you see a lot of discussion-based classes and strategies being used effectively or sometimes not as effectively there. I think in K through 12, it would be wonderful if we could bring more of the wisdom of that kind of discussion level, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, there's a word. Pedagogy?
Yes, pedagogy.
Something like that.
Yes.
Thank you. That's a weird word, and I always forget it. But yes, there's something about bringing that pedagogy. I think that where education has sometimes, I think, failed us in the past, and I am not an education expert, this is just my own observation, is in making us think that education is just about absorbing knowledge, and that knowledge is chiefly found in books, and in the workings and writings and studies of people who have been celebrated by this or that academic institution or this or that, whatever. Instead of, no, a lot of wisdom comes from knowing how to relate to each other and how to learn from each other, and knowing how to put our own input into a situation or into a room, and knowing how to wrestle with those questions that some textbook actually cannot answer for all time. And goodness knows, we have a lot of those kinds of questions. So whether you're in K through 12, practicing this with something, far lighter in scope, should there be uniforms in private schools, or I don't know, but practicing disagreement, practicing debate, practicing having to sit there and contend with someone who is disagreeing with you openly, and what are you going to do? Teachers who can model that being wrong is fine. It's not a big deal. You're not going to, right? Because what I remember, again, in movies and TV, is that, the student who raises their hand better be correct. Otherwise, why are you participating? And I think that's really unfortunate. If we could build classrooms where I've got something to say and help me out here, and we can all kind of help each other out. I think that would be really cool. And I see a lot of classrooms already moving in those directions, but let's train, right? Yuval Levin, this wonderful conservative scholar, made a point that just really stuck in my heart, that Americans, they don't grow on trees. In order to be an American in the sense of following in this tradition of disagreeing, of contending with ideas, of that stuff that's baked into our DNA, we need to build a culture that trains us to be Americans, no matter where you initially came from, who you're from. It doesn't matter. I'm Mexican. I don't know. But that is a culture we need to build and we need to assert, and no better place than the classroom.
Yeah, and I will say, the first book that I published, I'm not trying to sell it to you right now, but the title literally is Deliberative Pedagogy, which is not a great title, by the way, for a book. But there are a lot of efforts, I mean, and you know this from the work that you do and the space where you are. So many, particularly in colleges and universities, are really trying to build these spaces and think about how do we navigate these issues, I think constructively, helping kind of build the civic muscle, if you want to think about that, right?
Exactly.
The practices that carry well beyond a course or a semester or even your time as a student, for example.
Yes.
So this common reader largely read, not exclusively, but all of our first year students, they were invited and asked to read it before they came, and we've had conversations this semester in our courses. And so the next question from Sarah Kramer, who's an early childhood education major from Wilmington, Delaware, asks this question: what advice would you give to young adults who are just starting to explore how to be open-minded and accepting of others, especially as they transition from high school, home, to college, which is when most students do not fully understand, as she says, their responsibility? That sort of transitional moment, like what insights or suggestions might you have as people are stepping into a space that is different from the world that they've maybe been in for a long time, the group of friends, the teachers, the mentors?
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about that transitional moment when you leave behind the familiar and you're stepping into the unfamiliar is that it's a veritable parade of invitations to curiosity. And you're all doing it together, which is awesome, right? It's not that isolating of an experience because most of you are from somewhere else, and most of you, used to live with your family, and now you're out here. So it's awesome. It's awesome. You almost don't have to try. The opportunities to question yourselves, to notice how you've assumed the world worked this whole time. And now you're getting to know people for whom it works very differently. And you're spending a lot of time with them, and you're in classrooms where this and that. It's kind of happening already. So I would say that the big piece of advice is receive it, be open to it. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There will be opportunities for shame. Like I think about my early days in the newsroom. Oh my gosh, like how I was made so much fun of because I didn't know how this worked and that worked. And like, okay, you have to kind of take that. But again, a lot of you are going to do it the same way. And so what? So what? So you're learning something and you're in a different place than someone else. So what? It probably all nets itself out, cancels itself out. But I think there is so much power and possibility and potential in the person who just embraces that there's a lot of things they're dead wrong about and they don't know what. So let's go find out. Let's figure this out. Let's do our best. Let's act upon our best understanding all the time. Let's not hide because we think we might be wrong. Let's raise our hand, say the thing, the whole class laughs, and we go, okay. So, I mean, I know that's really hard to imagine. I know that's fairly utopian because as David McRaney, another interviewee on the podcast, says, he's a wonderful scientist and researcher on persuasion. And he says, like, we know this from the research, the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. So not belonging is the scariest thing of all. That's maybe the most important fear that we need to wrestle with. Who's going to judge us? What's going to happen? But I'm telling you, like people who see that barrier as being a little lower than others, really have the world at their fingertips. So embrace what's already around you. Just open your eyes to it. It's already there. You barely have to try.
So we have a mix of people in this room. We've got a lot of first year students, but if I can gauge, right, we've got some faculty, we've got some community members, so we've got kind of the age range. And so Reshu Bujanki, also from Wilmington, a marketing major, asked an interesting age question. So do you think that age plays a factor in embracing the mentality that disagreement is beneficial and that understanding all types of people is important? Do you think that younger people may be more open to understanding others, or is this limited at certain moments in life, right? We're more open to possibility and change. Our brains are squishy till we're 25, for example, right? It changes when we get a little bit older. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I gotta say, every time I kind of feel like I'm coming down on one side of that question, something happens that makes me go, nope, never mind. I'm totally wrong on that. I think it's one of those where there's so many variables at play that I certainly don't think that I feel comfortable saying one way or the other. Because while it's true that, here's what I think that young people and older people have their strengths and their weaknesses generationally on these questions, right? So yeah, young people conditioned to be learning, told by their whole society that they're supposed to be learning. Okay, like a little more, the student identity is a little more familiar. At the same time, the world that they live in is very familiar to them, and has formed them and shaped them. And it's a little more difficult to imagine kind of different worlds and what those other worlds might have led them to. Older folks, boy, they've been through a lot. They've been through a lot of life stages. They've experienced, I mean, I sort of feel when I became a mother, the old me went away. I don't even know what happened to her. The whole world looked different. Suddenly all of Seattle was just parks and strollers that I had never seen before in my life, even though they were there the whole time. So you go through life stages, you kind of, it's like you've lived more of the different kinds of movies that human beings could star in. And you know them for yourself. And that leads to a lot of wisdom. At the same time, you also might lock into a lot of certainty about your points of view because, boy, they've gotten a lot of testing throughout your life. And so you might be tempted to think, well, that's how I know they're right. No. So there's weaknesses and there's strengths, both to the young and the old. I would say that there's also a lot of challenges just with cultures, the cultures you're in. I've talked to, there's a lot of immigrant families. I'm an immigrant family where, wherever your parents came from, you really didn't talk about this or that, or you didn't speak to your elders in this way, right? And here we are in America where young people pick up a different culture, and that can become very challenging. So, boy, the generational divides have a lot of other divides baked in. Not to mention, of course, like what happens when someone's a parent to someone else, they start to think that they're responsible for you and your thinking, or that you're an extension of them, which is not true, but they will feel that way. I certainly feel that way about my 12-year-old, and that can get in the way of my responsible parenting. So now I empathize with that. Whereas before I had kids, I probably wouldn't have. So again, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. So we're coming towards our end. We're not quite there. And we're going to have a little bit of a recognition in just a moment because we've had, I think, when our previous conversations in prep for this, our students have written these wonderful essays, and we're going to recognize some of them here in just a few minutes with a recognition that I think appropriately that they're exploring the themes of the book and how they've been thinking about it. But before we get to that point, I want to ask you, I don't want to say last question, but this is pretty close. This book, you published it just a few years ago, right? The world felt maybe quite a bit different from when this came out. And you obviously wrote it, really before. Published in 2022, but referencing the last number of years. What has changed from the moment of not just the inception of this book and your writing of it, but since you've been engaging with people around the themes of this and doing this work professionally? What has changed? What's different in a way that you might say it in another way today versus what you did even 2 years ago, which feels like a long time?
Yeah, very many things, but I'll boil it down to 2 or 3. So number one, if I were to write it again, I have learned, and this is a personal conviction, that curiosity extended outward is no good without curiosity extended inward. And I would have written more to emphasize that, but I didn't know it at the time the way I know it now. It's so important to develop the practice of sensing your own reactions and inquiring into your own feelings and interpretations of things as a baseline. So that's one, as I would have said more about that. And I think the world kind of demands more of that. Now I understand that as we go forward. Another is the relationship between truth and trust. The world rightly is very concerned about the state of truth. Coming from journalism, journalists, we see ourselves as the great defenders of truth, institutionally and as part of this society. What we don't see is that we can't access truth without trust. What we don't see is that we can't engage in a collective search for truth without trust. What we don't see is that a lot of truth is only found when we turn to each other, not just when we shame each other for not accepting the facts as we see them. So that's really important. And then third, and this one's very recent for me, Tim, so it's the first time I'll say it out loud, because usually I say, oh, there's two. And I'm like, no, I think there's three. I would say that one of the biggest gifts that my friendships and relationships with conservative folks in my life that I've developed in the last few years has given me is permission to hold love and pride in this country out loud. I think something about my liberal leaning, some of the signals I picked up told me that if I want to fix this country, I can't waste that much time saying how much I love it. And in fact, if I'm too patriotic, it's going to sound like I accept it the way it is in all ways. And boy, I am so grateful to all the people who have helped me discover that. So I think, plus it's led me to learn more about the founding of the country and the incredible histories that we have, both the sins and the triumphs and everything we can learn. There's so much richness in that history that I think can give us a lot of hope. So yeah, I would have put more of that in there, my real gratitude and pride for this country I was not born in, but that feels entirely mine. And that I think ought to feel entirely all of ours. And that, so that we can carry it and hold it and take responsibility for it. I think that's the only way we're going to save it.
So a beautiful answer, and maybe this is the real last one here. And it's a twofer. What is it that keeps you up at night and you're concerned about related to all that we've been talking about today? Mm-hmm. And then also, what for you makes you most hopeful?
Yeah. So what keeps me up at night is the possibility of violence. Yeah, just the, violence. I think we're all terrified of that. We've seen it and it's terrible, really awful. And just as bad is the possibility of utter despair and hopelessness. I've seen some of that in Mexico, like a certain kind of acceptance of a status quo that I don't think should be accepted necessarily, but just comes from this place of there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. So I find that to be the real place where the real threat to our democracy is that. Because I think as long as we hold it, we're not going to lose it, no matter who wins or loses an election. So that's my belief. And then your last thing is what gives you hope.
Yes.
So I have the enormous privilege, by virtue of the work that I do, of being in a lot of rooms with a lot of people who hold some influence and some power and are, in some cases kind of in a kind of whisper campaign, like plotting all these ways to make things right. And that gives me a lot of hope. And it's not all like behind closed doors. Governor Cox, a Republican governor of Utah, has been an extraordinary leader on helping elected officials, disagree better and go against this tide of, we only know that you're on our side and you're a loyal member of our party by how much contempt you throw at the other side. What is that? Nobody wants that. He's one of the first kind of loudest politicians to be so high ranking, to just say it like it is. And he's gotten other politicians to come in behind him. So there's folks like him, and I could go on and on. There's such a list. There's students at different schools. There's people just who are going, enough, this is dumb. And are creating spaces where other people can practice the art of the democracy we deserve, darn it. So that's giving me a ton of hope. Like, honestly, I look at all that and I go, we're good. We're good.
Mónica, it has been wonderful to be in conversation with you about the book. So let's give a round of applause to you for sharing the book with us, but also your insights and perspectives, which I think are really born from this. If
If I may,
please.
thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the students who sent in those deeply thoughtful questions. Those were awesome. Good questions help us all think better. So thank you for helping me think better. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you can stay with us in the recognition moment, I think Megan Beerley from our first year seminar is gonna now take the stage, and I'm gonna become a helper.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Beery, and I am the program manager for First Year Seminar, as well as the Common Reader program. And as Tim mentioned, every year we do an essay contest around the selected book. And this year we had an essay contest around Mónica Guzmán's I Never Thought of It That Way, and we received over 230 essays. So just a short summary, the first year students reflected on how their perspectives about the polarization of politics in the United States have changed after reading Mónica's book. In their essays, they considered strategies of recognizing siloing and othering, as well as reflecting on how to practice curiosity and empathy in conversations with friends and family. They emphasized the importance of confronting their own biases and assumptions in order to push past awkward moments into deeper conversations about differing perspectives. A number of students combined textual analysis and strategies from the book with their own past experiences in order to consider future interactions. And now I have the privilege of announcing our winners. As a reminder, all of our winners will receive a certificate right now from Tim, as well as a financial prize. We will start with, and I'm hoping some of our students didn't have to leave early, but first we have our honorable mentions. We have a pre-veterinary medicine major from Dover, Delaware, Grace Davis.
Congratulations.
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 This is great. This is like
awesome.
the
Is that working? I don't know.
No, this is
working.
great. This is great.
Okay.
We'll do a virtual handshake for you.
Excellent.
Our second honorable mention is an environmental studies major from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Emily Carroll.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. We have two
Congratulations,
students.
Emily.
Oh, thanks,
Sorry.
Mónica.
No, this is
Sorry, I'm
this
just
is
gonna
great.
put myself as like the third congratulations. Does that work?
This is fantastic. I feel like we're also like at a middle school awards ceremony, so this is fantastic.
It is very middle school. We have two students who could not be here tonight due to class conflicts, but I want to mention their names. They both received honorable mentions for their essays. Drew Patel, a finance major from Newark, Delaware, and Haley Federici, a wildlife ecology and conservation major from Williamstown, New Jersey. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay.
Go Drew and Haley. Woo.
Okay, in fourth place, we have a psychology education major from Newark, Delaware, Melanie Hudson.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Melanie.
We've got it down.
We got it.
In third place, a marketing major from Rockaway, New Jersey, Shannon Dawson.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congrats, Shannon.
And in second place, a finance major from Newark, Delaware, Felicia Carosi.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Good work, Felicia.
And without further ado, I'm thrilled to announce our first place winner is a meteorology major from Stevens, Pennsylvania, Jessica Keel.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congrats, Jessica.
Monica, thank you so much for being here. Tim, thanks for moderating. And thank you everyone for coming. And also essay winners, with your permission, Monica has asked to read your essays. So if that's okay with you, I'll reach out, get your permission, and send them over to you, Monica. Thank you.
Excellent. Can't wait. Thanks everyone so much. It's such an honor. It is such an honor. Thank you all.
And I would encourage you in closing to open yourselves to curiosity as Monica invites us to be able to ask that question. I've never thought about it that way. So thank you so much. Monica, continue the good work and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good, Tim. Thanks everyone.